Namaste and good evening. I, Swati Solanki, researcher and assistant editor at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a special talk on small cities and environmental governance in Gujarat and West Bengal, need for external intervention or capacity building by Professor René Véron as a part of the series, The State of Cities #City Conversations. The series is organized by IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. The moderator for today's session is Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay. So, is Associate Professor at Visva-Bharati, Santiniketan, and Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI. We welcome you, sir. It is my privilege to introduce the speaker for today's session. Our speaker today is Professor René Véron. Sir is Professor of Social Geography at University of Lausanne in Switzerland. His research addresses issues of urban environmental governance with a focus on small cities and a regional specialization on South Asia. Currently, he works on exploring political and social processes related to urban environmental services and resources, including water supply, sanitation, solid waste management, and flood governance. We welcome you, sir. As discussants, we have with us Professor Gopa Samanta. Ma'am is Professor of Geography at University of Burdwan, West Bengal. Dr. Sally Cawood, ma'am, is Global Governance's Fellow at Department of Urban Studies and Planning, University of Sheffield, England. We welcome you, ma'am. And Sameer Unhale, sir, is Joint Commissioner at Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. Welcome you, sir. My heartiest welcome to you all for today's pertinent talk. Now, I would like to invite our moderator, Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, to initiate the discussion and invite our speaker and panelists taking the discussion forward. We really look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Yeah, a very good evening and namaskar to all of you. Just let me say a few words about the City Conversation series first. The Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI started this series in 2019, and we are fortunate to have with us renowned urban experts from different countries sharing their ideas on the processes of demographic, environmental, economic, political and social changes in the cities and how to manage these fast-growing cities. Now, today's lecture is very important and timely for at least two reasons. Firstly, despite the rapid growth of small cities in India, very little research has been carried out on the social, political, and economic dynamics of the smaller cities. But the development of these small cities is of supreme importance in ensuring sustainable urbanization in India. And secondly, the problems of infrastructural deficits, weak finances, then weak institutional capacity, poor governance arrangements are far more severe in the smaller cities. Of course, many reform measures have been initiated to address these problems. Decentralization is one of the most prominent among them as far as the governance issues are concerned, and it largely draws on the literature on getting institution rights and merits of participatory frameworks. But even after more than 25 years of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, with its elaborate mandates for devolution of functions, funds, and functionaries, we are still yet to fully comprehend why city governments function so differently in India. This is indeed a puzzle. And it seems that the devils lie in the details of the governance arrangement and practices. But as I have mentioned, that these are clearly under research. Whatever research is done mainly focuses or largely focuses on the big cities. For example, we know that participatory framework is undoubtedly important in city governance, but this framework implicitly assumes that there exists a kind of tremendous interest in the cities for participation. So we do not address the crucial matter or like how such participation is generated. So we are all eager to listen to today's speaker and the discussions to think through these important puzzle. And as Swati has already mentioned, that today's topic of the title of today's lecture is Small Cities and Environmental Governance in Gujarat and West Bengal, Need for External Intervention or Capacity Building. So on behalf of Team IMPRI, I again welcome you, Professor Véron. It's wonderful to have with us, and also we'll be joined shortly by Professor Gopa Samanta. We have already been joined by Dr. Sally Cawood and Mr. Unhale, who is the Joint Commissioner at the Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. So with these few words, let me request our speaker, Professor Véron, to take over. It's over to you, Professor Véron.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and I hope that I will at least be able to address some of your questions that are all very relevant, but I probably will not manage to address all of them with enough depth. So it was very nice that you invited me to give this talk, so that gives me also a chance to get more feedback on this research. And it's basically some research that is based, or a talk that is based on fieldwork that has been done quite a while ago when JNURM was still active. However, I still think that insights are relevant today. We are, because of kind of follow-up programs to JNURM, like AMRUT, Smart City programs, and so on and so forth. So for this research, we are in the process of publishing it with the Economic and Political Weekly. And when I say we, I include Natasha Cornea and Anna Zimmer, who have also contributed to this research, and they have actually done the bulk of the fieldwork. So you see that there's a question in the subtitle, and that question is meant primarily as a question that could give some ideas or guide the discussions. My talk will lead to this question, but I don't think that I will provide any definite answer to it. Here is a quick overview of what I'm trying to cover. And I realize that I have perhaps a little bit too many slides. So sometimes I will go through things quite quickly, also in the knowledge that we will have time later on in the discussion and the Q&A session. So this presentation is quite closely related to the question of urban decentralization. And after a brief introduction on the existing literature on urban decentralization and governance in India, I will structure the presentation along the so-called 4 Fs of decentralization, which are functions, functionaries, funds, and freedoms. And the freedoms or municipal agency is somewhat, or can be understood as an outcome of the other 3 Fs. Each of these elements will be discussed for both Gujarat and West Bengal in a comparative perspective, and also in relation to environmental urban governance. And the urban environment here is understood in a very broad sense to include the creation and maintenance of urban green spaces, but also the creation and maintenance of infrastructure like water supply, sanitation, and or waste management. The focus of the analysis will be on governance, although I'm very much aware that municipal agency also depends on other things, including the economic base, the quality of civil and political society, cultural factors, and so on and so forth. Good. Let me start with the introductory part. And urban governance in India does take place in the context of official political decentralization. And Soumyadip has already referred to the 74th constitutional amendment, and I don't have to go through this in detail because I assume that most of you are very familiar with the amendment. What is quite important here is, of course, the creation of urban local bodies, the democratization of municipalities, an aspect that I will get back to, or come back to in this talk is the issue about funds, the devolution of funds, and of course also the devolution of function responsibilities to urban local bodies. What is important here is that lots of functions that are linked to the urban environment have officially been devolved to the urban local bodies. An important point here is that the enactment and implementation of the 74th Constitutional Amendment has been left with state governments. And that led to strong interstate variations. On the other hand, that also gives scope for comparative studies, as we have done it to some extent. Now, the existing literature looks at urban decentralization in India, and very generally, it finds that this decentralization is incomplete or sometimes also quite ineffective. So it's a rather pessimistic account of it. In terms of responsibilities, one sees that parastatal agencies have even enforced their power since the 1990s. One has also sort of been remarking that centrally sponsored schemes are often superseding decentralization. In terms of functionaries or human resources, it's very clear that there's technical and managerial capacity constraints at the municipal level. And some have also sort of looked at politics at the municipal level and think that that elected councillors are often dominated by bureaucrats. When it comes to money or funds, the literature states quite clearly that ULBs are underfunded. They are very much dependent on revenue sharing and government grants and have limited own revenues. So as a consequence, the literature suggests that there's very little freedoms or limited municipal agency, and municipalities very often find it quite challenging to expand urban services and infrastructure. Sometimes they find it even difficult to maintain it. And our research, to a large extent, actually confirms that. However, there are some nuances that I will get to later on. Now, despite quite the big literature, there are also some gaps in that literature. And that literature on urban decentralization in India refers or is mostly composed of individual case studies. And as has already been discussed, these case studies refer mostly to the large cities. There, on the other hand, there's quite a few macro level studies that aggregate the whole of India, which is, however, quite difficult because cities are quite variable. They vary from one to another. So our research tried to address some of these gaps in the sense that we looked at small cities outside of metropolitan areas. And we also sort of tried to do some qualitative comparative studies. I mean, there's no representation or representativeness in there, but nevertheless, we wanted to go a little bit beyond individual case studies. So this all with the aim to arrive at the more nuanced picture of actually existing urban decentralization in India. Just coming very briefly to the research sites, there's two states, West Bengal and Gujarat. We picked these two states because of their different political economic trajectories in relation to decentralization, but also in relation to neoliberalization. At one point, we put up the hypothesis that Gujarat would neglect its small cities as it is perhaps more economic reform oriented, focuses on large growth engines, that would the cities be. And West Bengal, on the other hand, with a long history of left governments, would be more oriented to the urban poor. However, you'll see also that this hypothesis has to be nuanced to a very large extent. Within these two states, we looked at two small cities each. You have some basic information on these totally 4 cities. I will not further go into that. Now let's look at a first F here, and a first element, functions or the responsibilities or the institutional framework that has guiding decentralization in India. So both West Bengal and Gujarat have adhered on paper to the 74th amendment. They have passed legislation that concretize this. However, their institutional framework is actually quite different. And one thing that they have, however, in common is the role, or an important role, of parastatal agencies. In Gujarat, they go long back, and they are mostly kind of service-related parastatals that create urban infrastructure. For example, the Gujarat Water and Sewerage Board, the Gujarat Urban Development Mission, and so on and so forth. In West Bengal, there are also lots of parastatals. However, they are more area-based parastatals, and they're also more recent. So these so-called urban development authorities have, in some cases, superseded the role of urban local bodies. On this map, I think you see my cursor, you see a urban development authority that encompasses 2 urban municipalities here, Kharagpur and Midnapur, and surrounding areas. So these are bigger areas. So the problem is that, well, officially it is very clear, you know, that the urban development authorities should look at infrastructure that goes beyond the municipal boundaries. But in reality, it's of course very difficult to define that. We can define, let's say, an environmental problem or an environmental need at a scale that we want. I mean, every issue can be defined at different scales. What we found in the field is really that there's very little coordination between these bodies. And one municipal planner lamented that there's absolutely no coordination, that often they don't even know each other's plans. A state level officer in West Bengal also sort of explained that or linked that to an increasing influence actually of the state government over urban local bodies. And for him, and you see the quote, the urban development authorities would be, or he sees them as a way how the state government influences urban infrastructure creation, and that the state government basically can nominate its own people to the urban development authorities. So it's not only, often the efficiency argument is of course made for the UDAs, however, it's also politics. I might not go too much into the issue of urban planning, just to say that in West Bengal, it is much more participatory and decentralized than in Gujarat, where it is really top down, but very kind of seen in a very efficient way. However, also the participatory elements in West Bengal have become or have eroded over time. Let me talk briefly about human resources and capacities in a second main part here. Here is just a table, and just look maybe at the last line of the table. It shows quite the striking difference between the 2 states. If corrected for population size, there are fewer municipal staff in Gujarat. And what is quite interesting here is that qualitative interviews, however, did not give any indication of a general understaffing of municipalities in Gujarat. We can also look at technical managerial expertise in both states. They're actually quite well-trained engineers, urban planners, and others. There's in both states competitive state exams that selects these officers. However, in West Bengal, these officers were very often overworked. So lots of the staff also that we saw on the list before did not relate to skilled workers, but lots of staff is actually so-called unskilled. There are particularly lots of people involved in solid waste management in the form of sweeping. And they appear then on the payrolls of the municipalities. A particular issue in West Bengal was also the issue of vacant posts, something that we did not see in Gujarat. And that led, of course, also to officers being overworked. In Gujarat, things were quite different. I mean, no, they did not relate to any problems with staffing. Another issue was also the whole kind of local politics and the relationship between bureaucrats and elected officials. And that starts already with the position of the chief or the executive officer at the municipal level, so the highest bureaucrat, civil servant, if you want so. In Gujarat, there are highly qualified people from a state cadre, people who still want to leave their mark as young career bureaucrats, while in West Bengal, the executive officer was usually a retired government officer, and that led also to a way where, and I'm not going into the detail here, we can discuss that later, that led to a situation where in West Bengal, the councillors and the mayor had much more power over decisions, while in Gujarat, lots of decisions were made or at least strongly prepared by the chief officer. I come to the third key element here about funds and a quick look at some development schemes and the issue also of fiscal devolution. On this slide, again, just look at these two lines that I have highlighted. And if you just look at these two lines, it becomes quite clear that in West Bengal, municipalities rely much more strongly, or they get more funding through government schemes, either from the state level or from the central level. So receiving funds is, of course, a good thing. However, this is also a double-sided sword, because these are all tied funds. They're tied to particular projects and so on. So the allocations of these funds can be often quite arbitrary. You can see that with this quote, where somebody shows that good connections are important to the higher levels. What is perhaps even more important is that urban local bodies find it sometimes quite difficult to find the matching funds that are required for the centrally sponsored schemes in particular. And the state government in West Bengal often pitched in to help the urban local bodies so that they still can make these investments. However, that help meant then also that the state coffers there was not enough in the state coffers to engage in a real financial devolution through direct transfers of funds to the ULBs. You can see that reflected in this quote by a state finance commissioner. So another pitfall is that the urban local bodies have also to pay for operation and maintenance of the created infrastructure, and particularly in West Bengal, they were often struggling doing this. I already mentioned the fiscal decentralization and the idea that under the 74th constitutional amendment, also untied funds should reach the municipalities or the urban local bodies. However, this in both states has been quite limited. In West Bengal, even though the State Finance Commission asked for augmenting this proportion. Only about 5% of the state tax income is actually devolved. In Gujarat, it's even less, but we see afterwards some detail that shows that there's actually more untied funds in Gujarat at the local level. So that is, of course, quite a big concern. So in West Bengal, particularly, lots of tied funds and very, very little untied funds. What I mentioned before refers to the so-called octroi compensation, which exists in the case of Gujarat. And with the abolition of octroi in 2002, the Gujarat government now devolves funds, untied funds, to municipalities to replace, to compensate for that loss of kind of local revenue. And that leads to actually much more funds available at the local level in a open, untied way. I will not go much through the own revenue raising powers, but here it's a similar picture that in West Bengal, that power of revenue raising is very constrained, not only because of the economic base, but also because of particular legislation. Good. I mentioned already that in Gujarat, more untied funds are available at local level, and we have also found that represented or reflected in discourses of financial health in Gujarat, while in West Bengal there were discourses of very weak financial capacity. So the mayor said that all they can do is to implement central and state schemes, and that was not the spirit of the 74th Amendment, of course. I leave this also out. I come to the last of the 4 Fs, the issue about municipal agency. So far, what I've shown is pretty much things that we have found in the literature. It's a confirmation of the literature. Municipal agency is strongly constrained due to incomplete devolution of funds, coexistence of parastatal and institutional overlaps in responsibilities, limited human resources and capacities. So that points to a continued dominant role of state governments. Often municipalities are reduced to the role of operating and maintaining urban environmental infrastructure that was created by state or central schemes through larger projects. And even for that maintenance, some municipalities struggled, as we can sort of see very visibly through uncollected, openly dumped waste, clogged drains, and so on and so forth. However, this general picture needs to be qualified. And here in the picture, you see a municipal engineer from Navsari in Gujarat. He's standing there in front of a well-kept park in the municipality that was created with in a public-private partnership. And I just want to give you an example of quite an extraordinary bottom-up initiative in Navsari of a relatively large drinking water project. So they brought in, were able through negotiations to bring in canal water from the Ukai Dam, and they revitalized a polluted urban pond in the center of Navsari. Put a water treatment there, and were able to distribute water to the population of the small town. So what is really remarkable is that this project has been planned and implemented by municipal staff, particularly by an engineer who worked before the state government and had lots of technical skills. But it's not only the technical skills that are quite remarkable, but also the managerial skills that this municipality showed, because it had to coordinate with different state agencies and also non-state agencies to make the whole project work. Similarly, they also had to look for funding from different sources which again needs quite a lot of coordination and negotiation skills. So what you see here is a very positive example of municipal agency. We did not see any other such examples, particularly outside of Navsari. And even in Navsari, this is one example. In other cases, municipal agency was also strongly constrained. For example, they tried to implement a solid waste management project, which failed, and particularly because it was also opposed by the state government bureaucracy. In Burdwan and Medinipur, there's also some bottom-up initiatives, despite the limited agency, but these bottom-up initiatives were quite small. There was an interesting segregation at source project in Medinipur, particularly. In Burdwan, we could see ban on plastic bags, but also some projects of beautification at the small scale. What was nevertheless quite remarkable in both these small cities is how they integrated or tried to integrate the different state schemes and central schemes in their own city development plan. However, everything was quite small scale. And finally, Amreli, which is in the same state as Navsari, but there we did not really see any signs of municipal agency in this part of Saurashtra. Straight projects were imposed from the top down. There was not any signs of local level planning. However, nevertheless, infrastructure, particularly water supply and sanitation, was created. And in many cases also neighborhood initiatives, community-based initiatives were pitching in where the state failed. Just briefly, some conclusions, and these conclusions refer to that question that I have posed in the title, and to which I hope I have guided you so far. So the municipal environmental governance in small cities, at least from what we have seen, is mostly limited to creating and maintaining, mostly to maintaining urban infrastructure, actually. In other fields of the urban environment, like ecological restoration or environmental protection, the municipalities were not very active. We have also seen that the municipal agency is very variable between the states, but also between the cities. And even in the case of Navsari, the agency was still kind of embedded in state government structures, and it was actually dependent on the collaboration with state government agencies. Now, there is, of course, a dilemma that one can point out. These small cities, as Soumyadip has said at the beginning, they have immediate needs. Their infrastructure is very deficient. So it's very clear there's an immediate need, and one can sort of ask the question, well, we have to do perhaps something now. Maybe we cannot wait as long as it would take that the municipalities could stand on their own feet. Or in other words, there's a dilemma between these immediate needs and a more longer term capacity building. And in that article, we refer back to an article by Om Mathur of 2006, where he posed the question that it is not quite sure whether decentralization needs just a little bit more time in India, or whether it has encountered indifference. And looking at our data from our field experience, we would say that or let's say already in 2017, it was clear, and I think that has been reinforced till now, that it has actually encountered indifference. There's little indication that central and state governments are willing to empower municipalities. I mean, they're very much willing in intervening in municipalities particularly through centrally sponsored schemes, through missions like Amrut, Visva-Bharati, and others. And what I'm saying, I'm not saying that this is necessarily wrong, but I think it is a political and a policy question to ask whether this approach is right to intensify external interventions, to get quick fixes. And of course, these interventions have always a package of capacity building and so on and so forth. However, they also employ lots of consultants from outside that are in small cities only temporarily. I'm not necessarily saying that that is the wrong thing to do. However, I think the question has to be asked whether a approach of investing more in the long term in capacity building, in letting small cities agencies develop, whether that would not be an interesting alternative. Sorry, I think I went a little bit over time, and I hope that you nevertheless were able to bear with me.
No, it's nice. It's nice. Thank you for your wonderful lecture and all the insights which are quite apparent from your this lecture. Like this decentralization has truly been ineffective, that we all know, and you have wonderfully explained it through 4Fs: fund, functions, functionaries, and most importantly, which is not that much got attention, at least from a researcher's point of view, the freedom part, the municipal agency part. Although some of the recent works have been done on this agency related issues, but again, you have mentioned that in spite of shown that in spite of official devolution, how the state governments are pulling the strings, they are exercising a kind of significant control over many of the devolved functions, and also municipalities, they ultimately have very limited autonomy to make their decisions and implement them. So that also you have mentioned about the problem of coordination among the multiple agencies which are operating at the city level for providing or managing these urban services. You also discussed about these limited human resources, and also hinted at how the differences in internal official procedures having some impact on the local decision-making processes. And regarding funds, you have mentioned about these pitfalls of tight fund, which is constraining the urban local body's ability to manage the urban services, how the revenue autonomy may create a kind of virtuous circle for a better delivery of services. So, and also most importantly, as I mentioned, that municipal agency is still a kind of under-researched area. So you have mentioned like how municipal agency in the form of technical and managerial skills is helpful in better implementation of some of the urban services. And it seems that this state-local relation in terms of facilitating the local autonomy or building the local capacity turning out to be very, very crucial as far as this management of small cities are concerned. So it's very, very insightful. So let me now move over to our discussions. May I now request Professor Samanta, who has a very vast experience of dealing with all these issues in the eastern part of cities, and he has the vast experience of doing field survey on these related issues. So if you please share your comments. And thank you, in spite of being not so well, you are kind enough to join our discussion. So it's wonderful to have you.
Yeah, actually, I could not restrain myself to listen to René. That's why I'm here. Otherwise, I'm really not doing well. So wonderful to listen to you, René. And today is a special day it's just a mere coincidence. But I want to cite an example that in today's newspaper, Bengali newspaper, in the front page, I hope Soumyadip also has noticed that Kolkata mayor has declared that they cannot pay pension to the retired workers of Kolkata Corporation. And they were not paying this for the last 8 months. But that was not the case. But they were probably telling that we will give you. But now they have declared today. Yesterday they declared. So that is why it is in newspaper today. that they don't have money, they cannot give pension to the employees, which was part of their deal that when they joined, they were entitled to get the funds for pension, etc., social security. So that is, it's a coincidence with René's talk today. So it's also something to add on. And I was thinking that I know I was very close to René and Natasha when they were working in Burdwan. And first dissemination workshop was held in my department. So, and I'm just trying to give some inputs from West Bengal because Gujarat, I don't have much understanding. What I understand well, that in West Bengal, when I tried to work with West Bengal situation and Jharkhand and Bihar, what I noticed that the structure itself, mayor and council. So if we need somebody in West Bengal to know, we usually walk into the office of chairperson or mayor. And when it is a case of Jharkhand, everybody says that you have to wait for the executive officer to come in. So that I know, that is a big difference between other states. Maybe I don't have much understanding of other, but Jharkhand and Bihar, I have seen this, noticed this while working with Hazaribagh, Chumbitilaya, and Samastipur, and other towns in Bihar. So that is a case. But what happened, René, these days in West Bengal, many things have changed over time. As I'm following West Bengal, especially this small town governance since 2006 till now. So I'm seeing a lot of changes in situations. Like at one point of time, after 2000 or something, at really decentralization and participation of people, they started thinking about that participation needs to be ensured. So, the ward committee meeting must be held on, and whether they follow it up, the whatever is coming from the people or not, but at least there was a kind of token initiative to gather people in ward committee meeting and let them speak, and then at least make a resolution out of it. I won't claim that it was a very participatory, because I attended such a meeting in certain cases, but there was a policy kind of thing. But in the couple of years since this new government in power, no ward committee meeting was convened in no municipality, almost. So that has become a clear picture, clear tendency, change. And another thing is 2006, we had a water tax issue. I'm coming to the even capacity building kind of, or financial devolution. When we think about the financial devolution, and as René has already pointed out, small cities are entirely almost dependent on the fund from the government. They hardly have some revenue generation avenues they can afford to, because it's only commercial sector or maybe health centers, etc., kind of, from which they can. And property tax, that it is not comparable enough for the functioning of the municipalities. There has been an enhancement in the property tax in recent years, but that's not much that a municipality can survive on. So, and another avenues was created in 2006 with the water tax, new introduced by the then government. And then this water tax was actually, we were following water this, as I was interested more in water sector. So I was following, and one of my PhD student, Malay Ganguly, has worked on Chandanagar and Chinsuya municipality, and he was calculating for longer period of time that how much this generation of wealth of Chandanagar corporation from the water tax, and suddenly, all of a sudden, with the change of power in the state government, all of a sudden there was no GO was published, but it was said that no, you cannot take the water tax. And it was a huge, that was the only, as I analyzed the budget, budgetary allocations of the municipalities' fund structure, I noticed that water tax was a major revenue generating sector. So somewhere it is like 50 lakh or 60 lakh per month or sometimes depending on different, like, Bolpur municipality, I interviewed that time and I talked about this. So they said it's only 45 lakh per month. Think about it, Soumyadip. 45 lakh per month is not a joke for a municipality like Bolpur. So this was a case which, so rather than capacity building or exploring the possibilities of financial sustainability, the government played a completely opposite role of making more dependent on the central government fund, and there lies the politics. And also I tried to look into when there was a change of government. Soumyadip probably can remember that in Murshidabad, some of the municipalities was not with the government, state government in power. So they were not getting much fund because they were not the government of local government. So there is always and this is not a new. I don't claim that this is not a new. This policy was always, so I always prefer to call decentralization, urban governance decentralization in West Bengal is always, and it was, a centralized decentralization policy. The state government wants to control, and state government completely wants to control the finance and financial provisioning. And also you have to be with us, the same party, then we'll give you fund. So that is the only narrative. When I interviewed some of the municipal officials in some cities in Murshidabad, they really claim that, and it has happened. And if we try to, and another important point is that Soumyadip has done a lot of work on municipal financing, and recently Priya Chaudhary is listening here also. So Priya Chaudhary and me, we had published one paper on municipal financing, and when we are trying to locate that which cities and category wise, small cities or bigger cities, what is the condition, you see that 2016 State Finance Commission report. After that, you have nothing. And 2016 data ended in 2013. And now the problem is West Bengal even doesn't keep data on many frauds. So nobody knows what is happening. At least what was there, at least regular election was there. Elected representative was there. And for the last 5 years, most of the municipalities, there is no elected government. The administrator is running the city. So it's going to be bizarre and a problematic state. I don't know whether there is a solution in near future or not, but the problem is, the situation is I would say that it's a green situation we are heading, and I don't think that we have a big respite out of that in recent period of time. And my concluding remark would be, as I would try to agree, I would try to say that René has pointed out another important issue, the tied fund and non-tied fund. Tied fund, and what I feel that, like, JNNURM, Amrut, why these project-based urban development initiative? And there lies the problem. So the program specific allocation of fund from the central government is at one end, it's a big problem. And then state government tied funds, another problem. So unless and until that urban development is a part and parcel of other kinds of development, it will happen like that. So municipality will think about it, what kind of money or help they need, and in which sector. Because if there is a provision for water in Amrut and there is no provision for other thing, and it's the same that the point René is raising again and again, the tied fund is, they always tie the hands of the chairperson or the executive officer of the municipalities, because what they need, actually they don't get it in time. And this kind of this program based urban development, like Amrut or JNNURM, and I think that it is not a sustainable system to follow. So I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopadi. Like, yes, you have mentioned so many important points. Like, I completely agree with your view that West Bengal in recent times has experienced a greater tendency towards decentralization. It is not decentralization, rather decentralization. And You have correctly mentioned about the inability of the many small cities in mobilizing their resources. But one point, as far as my field experiences are concerned, is really haunting me, is that generally our perception is that the people, they do not want to pay taxes. But it's, for example, they do not want to pay taxes for water supply. But it's not that they are not living without water. They are living with water. They're accessing water. But the thing is that they want to pay the services as long as the services they are receiving is commensurating in some sense with the tax that they are paying. That means there should be a kind of, in economics, what we say, the equality between marginal cost and marginal benefit. Okay, so in fact, in one of the ward in Coach Bihar municipality I surveyed, their people, they were very much happy to pay tax, or rather fees, for collection of solid waste. So this was an interesting example. So there are various scopes for the smaller cities even to generate the revenues if they have the will, they have the political will to do so. And another important thing is that I think, which is a larger question, like this kind of decentralization or limited autonomy, or the limited functional autonomy, the 3 Fs, how do these 3 Fs have some impact on the last 4th F, that is the municipal agency? That could be a very interesting area of future research. I think Professor Véron will shed some more lights into it, because all of these things, like that state-local relation, the lack of municipal resources, all these things, I'm sure going to have some impact on the municipal agency. So yes, so I think Professor Véron will respond to all these things. And let me now request Dr. Sally to please, if you please share your comments or views. It's over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And it's been fascinating so far to listen to the conversation. So thank you to all of the organizers and the fellow panelists, and to Professor Véron for your excellent talk as well. So I'll be broadening out our focus a little bit from kind of West Bengal and Gujarat. I've been working the last 10 years looking at urban poverty and water and sanitation in Bangladesh primarily, but also India, in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Delhi. So what I'll talk through today is some of the kind of priority areas that I've come across in my own research over these last 10 years. And it really looks at who is involved in managing and providing the urban water and sanitation services. So one of the key questions when I'm thinking about these discussions of decentralization or even privatization is really who bears the burden, or where is the cost or the risk shifted onto? And from what I've seen, a lot of the time, it's often the bodies of, or people, or the labor of those who are the most marginalized within society, so spatially, economically, politically. So I just want to draw on some examples really broadly from this kind of broader geographical context, and also the research over the last years. So when we talk about who actually foots the bill or who bears the burden, obviously there's some huge financial gaps, as you mentioned, René, in your talk, in terms of lack of funds within local municipalities. But what this also means for those living in low-income settlements, for example, or low-income slum or informal settlements, is often that the costs are outsourced to unpaid labour for managing urban water and sanitation. So there's a really lively and interesting debate around who pays for urban services, and especially whose labour goes into operating and maintaining basic services such as water and sanitation, especially in low-income settlements. And that's also within small towns as well as in large cities. And a lot of my research has found that it's often women and girls who might actually unequally bear the burden of managing this sort of infrastructure. So that's always an interesting question around when we talk about outsourcing costs or outsourcing labour, who actually are the ones that are picking it up, and what are the benefits and burdens associated with that. So that's always something that I've been interested in when we talk about decentralization, participation and privatization, especially when we're talking about very constrained urban services and trying to provide access to everybody. And the other main kind of group of people I wanted to talk about, and that's what relating to some of the work I'm doing at the moment and will be doing more in the future, is on those who are actually involved in managing the waste itself when we talk about urban infrastructure and urban waste. So those that are manually or mechanically handling the solid medical and human waste that we produce in small towns and cities all over the world, but particularly in this region, we know that this particular caste groups or religious groups are involved in this kind of work. And what I've been seeing both in Bangladesh and also working with colleagues in India is that many people are actually quite concerned about the future trajectory of this kind of work in terms of job security, in terms of privatization, in terms of job takeover, in terms of fearing of job loss or income loss, because of the limited funds going into solid waste and fecal waste management. And fecal waste management is something that is relatively new in some contexts, or FSM as we like to term that. The lack of funding has knock-on effects for the security of the jobs, health and safety, the equipment that can be purchased, who operates this equipment. So I think there's a lot of important questions around the dynamics of who, again, is facing the burdens and some of the challenges of lack of funding for basic service provision. And often we see it's certain workers from certain backgrounds who might be bearing the burden of that. So it'd be interesting to see what other colleagues in the call have in terms of reflections on that area. And obviously that has some very important historical context in terms of the administrative shifts that happened way back in kind of colonial era we're talking about here, and how that affects what happens today and how roles are accrued and different opportunities are there today. So there's a lot of kind of interesting historical context, I think, to also draw on there. And just to reflect a bit on some of the concerns that are coming from sanitary workers in both India and Bangladesh and the research that we've been doing is, as I said, around lack of permanent posts, worrying that they are increasingly being privatized and subcontracted in very precarious contracts that are often lower paid compared to more secure government jobs. So that's something that really is quite a kind of interesting and important area, I think, to look to in future. And often a lot of the waste workers we've spoken to have talked about either job loss or intensified work because of COVID-19. So I think there's also an interesting element of overlap there in terms of the impact of COVID-19 for waste and sanitary workers in small towns and larger cities. So just to kind of end up there, really, some of the questions I think maybe we could discuss together or pose is, again, who bears the burdens of these different governance processes and actually who benefits? What do these processes mean for jobs, labour and livelihoods, especially of those most arguably marginalised within society, in the context of general kind of high job competition? What do these implications have for jobs, livelihoods and labour? And also in terms of looking to the future, when we talk about mechanising different sectors or bringing in smart cities or machinery, what does that mean also, again, for these labouring workers, especially in terms of their job security, in terms of skill development for those groups, not only for the mid or higher level municipal staff, but also those who are doing the sweeping of the streets, who are cleaning the sewers and the drains. What does it mean for them in terms of mechanising the sector or putting more money into machinery, which is crucially needed, but can also be creating other layers of inequality as well. So those are some of the kind of broader reflections, and it's really nice to be part of the conversation. And I would just say, yeah, keep focused on those groups, and I think that's a good way to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sally, for sharing your reflections. It's indeed, and you have correctly raised some fundamental questions, I think, related to locating and sharing the responsibilities of managing the urban services, be it sanitation, be it water supply. So it's really very, very crucial and have some important impact on the aspect of municipal agency that Professor Véron has highlighted in his talk. So, well, I think Professor Véron will respond to all of your reflections and all these things. So thank you once again for joining this conversation, and we will continue with this conversation again. So now let me move over to Mr. Samir Unhale, who is always with us with his vast administrative experience. So over to you, sir.
Please unmute yourself, Samir.
Sorry. So thank you very much. First of all, I must express my gratitude to all the academicians and researchers who are investing their time, passion, and energy into studying the smaller towns and cities, because it's very important that all these experiences do come into the academic research and they do get documented, because very often we say that what we do in office, 1% of that gets documented, and what reaches academicians is 1% of what gets documented. So I think the interactions of communicating, I think, are very important. And I think these interactions will definitely help create a credible database for studying the urban systems. I will try to be as brief as possible. First of all, India's urban system is extremely huge. I keep on repeating it. If all the population of the 8,000 odd urban habitats, that's including census town, and almost 4,500 statutory towns is put together, then the Indian cities and towns will be the third largest country in the world as far as the population is concerned, with absolute diversity and change and various stages of socio-economic, cultural, and environmental situations of these cities and towns. So that's number one. Secondly, I feel that I think the municipal functioning started from 1850 in India. Broadly, we take that as a watershed, in which the first, among the first central act of the then the East India Company's British India government did was in 1850, an All India Act, which allowed all the provinces to allow municipalities. So municipalities in India are almost 170 years old. That's a fairly long duration for any institution to really exist and develop and mature and institutionalize. Thirdly, I felt that traditionally that's what many bureaucrats also and many study research in public administration also say, that the transition from a sort of a colonial imperial apparatus of governments into a democratic welfare apparatus that has happened in the last 70 years with the Constitution of India and the various amendments that happened to place, also manifest and reflects itself into the way the municipal system now is currently functioning. Of course, the 74th Constitutional Amendment, and I think the missions era, as one might say, which started from 2005-6 onwards, and I think is still continuing, is seen. I personally feel that the spirit of India's constitution is essentially cooperative federalism, and I personally don't see a reason why there should be a zero-sum game framework while studying the various levels of the governments interacting, and in my view being a part of Team India and trying to resolve the issues which are coming up with the India's urban system. So in my way, cooperative federalism and the team members of all the levels of government, including the private sector, the academia, the media, who could also be, in my view, is a more accurate way. In my view, more closer way of stating as to this various dynamics that is currently happening, because each strength of each level of government has its own strengths and capacities, and when they all come together, I think we see a new way in which the current framework can also be seen. I will try to focus myself on keywords like environment, like probably governance, and I think two issues of capacities, whether internal or external. I will try to now focus myself on that, because municipal functioning can be any and everything under the sun, and therefore probably the word that fascinated me was environment and governance. So I will try to work on that. So I think when you think of environmental issues, as we know, post 74th Constitutional Amendment, environmental protection of environment is a responsibility that is included into the 12th schedule as far as the urban is concerned. And also most of the acts, of course, my experience is not much. I can't be speaking of any other parts of the country or other states. But from where I come from, Maharashtra, the act of the municipal councils, for which is normally used for the smaller cities and towns, there is a provision. This responsibility, this job duty, has been incorporated into the statute itself, that the environmental protection needs to be done. Number one. Number two, there is a for all the bigger, for all the 1 lakh and above, 100,000 and above population towns, and of course the bigger municipal corporations that we have, there is a statutory responsibility of publishing an environmental status report every year. So all the, at least at current state, it will be around 43 A-class cities and towns are mandated by a statute to establish their environmental status reports, which I think is an important step as far as committing a local body to the environment. I think thirdly, when we talk of environmental governance in Indian framework, I believe it will be, of course, the Environmental Protection Act, which of 1986, which still is the basic mother act of all the rules which have been notified under that. And prior to the Environmental Status Act, I think we had the various acts which focus more on containing and controlling the pollution, like the Water Pollution Control Act, the Air Pollution Control Act. So these framework, I think, did created a focus for the municipal bodies to work on the environmental issues also. Of course, water supply, water supply treatment and solid waste management, which are the more traditional civic functions and duties of any municipality, do contribute a lot into the broader maybe ecological approach towards environment. They of course are important. And in two missions, as we see, the Swachh Bharat mission, which focused a lot on citizens' participation. I think it was the first time we saw so much of citizen participation in Swachh Bharat, in which a lot of volunteerism, a lot of maybe celebrities, a lot of media came and started working for a particular municipal cause, which in this case was Swachh Bharat. And I think this right today, I think if I don't today we attended an webinar of from the Orissa government, in which the slum level councils and slum level committees of the towns were given some responsibility and even some budget. I think it was a very good idea that you really went below the within the municipality. It's just not even the ward committee. Ward committees are also made, but below ward committee, so that was the experience shared by the top bureaucrat of the municipal department in Orissa just today evening, in which the central representative was also there. So I think we are seeing a lot of things which are happening, a lot of activities which are taking place, which are really taking the concerns of environmental governance in the idea that we discussed to the people. Next, I always felt that again I should be sharing that at least in the state of Maharashtra, the biodiversity committees which are made for all A level councils. So I mean, in fact, all these cities have a biodiversity committee, and amongst the various responsibilities for this biodiversity committee is also maintaining a register of the various plant and animal species which are there within the area of the city. So I think of course, and the next experience I would like to share is that apart from there's tend to be an way of looking at it as the missions somehow tend to, and the centrally sponsored schemes somehow tend to constrain the municipal powers or not, which I tend to have a different view on this, because these are the functions which are municipal functions. It is not that some other job has been imposed on the municipality, which is not a municipal job as far as the 12th the schedule of the constitution and the municipal act is there. So what is we are seeing in this framework of cooperative federalism is that the resources are also being given to the municipalities. It is not that at least in the state where I am working, it's not the parastatal which is by and large implementing the scheme. It is the state municipalities which are implementing. So what we are seeing is that funds are also being made available for the specific purpose of municipality. It is the state council or the local leadership which is a part of the decision-making process. And of course, in this, as I said, team spirit, we see all the good things coming of all levels, including the private sector, trying to resolve a particular issue. Because at the end of the game, at the end of the day, the citizens' aspirations are increasing, and as the economic level is going up, we see a lot of aspirations increasing. People want good services which they deserve, and then we have to find a solution which gets all the goods of all the people together and try to reach to a conclusion, to some logical end to that. Another part of the mission approach I would like to share here is that even the state government is now has come up with a competition among the cities for protection of environment of all the towns and cities, including the Gram Panchayat also. So in the state of Maharashtra, there are around 250 Gram Panchayats which otherwise could qualify into transitory urban areas, because it's where the urbanization of state is almost above 45%, or that was almost 11 years back. And now with the norms, we could well be above. I mean, it would be a matter of estimate, but I won't be surprised if we already crossed the 50% mark. So using the framework of competitive, participation of the community and the CBOs and all the NGOs of the city and town, and garnering their resources and their intents and their motives, and giving them a framework to work for environmental concerns of the city, which we call here in Maharashtra as the Maji Vasundhara. Vasundhara is another name for Earth. So the Maya Earth is another novel approach, which I found is quite good and could be replicated not here only in India, but also outside India. In fact, this received in COP26 in UK right now. It received the recognition at international level. So I think when I personally look at environment, focused, I mean, more narrower meaning of environment and municipal functioning, I see a hope of cooperative federalism bringing the best out of every level to resolve the issues on ground. And I think most important is going to be the participation of the citizens. Of the taxpayers or the voters or the complainants, whatever word we like to use here. But I think the municipality is a 0.5% population or 1/4% population of the entire town. And of course, there are concerns of finance, concerns of human resources, concerns of cadre management, concerns of good service conditions to the people. Finance, as was made, of course, is going to be a big point. But by and large, I feel that especially due to the climate climate cities, and we are seeing many focus which is coming from multilaterals, from international agencies, UN agencies, various philanthropies are trying to get connected with the municipal functioning in a way, and hopefully we could build up a good coalition among all these otherwise disparate actors, and try to work focusedly on improving the indicators of or the ease of living related with the environmental concerns of any city, as well as the small city. I think, of course, small cities would be requiring much more way of maybe a more nuanced way of interaction, greater support, which may not be looked as an interference, because what is participation, what is interference, very often becomes a matter of value judgment. And ultimately, we should be in a position to conserve the environment, promote it, protect it, and try to bring back the environmental consciousness within to the citizens, and also the otherwise abstract policy making apparatus and the early politics that we see at local level. So I think Soumyadip, thanks a lot. I tried to be as precise as possible. For me, I tend to speak a lot, but I thought I would be to the point this time. So thank you, Soumyadip, for this opportunity.
It's wonderful to listen to you. Yes, it's nice. And you rightly mentioned about this importance of cooperative federalism and the people's participation and all these things. And what actually is, what it was appearing from Professor Véron's lecture is that we generally tend to conflate decentralization with delegation, not devolution, because devolution is a much wider concept in the sense that where the elected local governments, they have the capacity to take and implement any decision. So that's what I think is not happening, as I have understood from Professor Véron's lecture. So, and what is important is that since Professor Véron is emphasizing a lot on these municipal agency, so this devolution has a greater connotation for public participation as well as municipal agency, because they are all mutually reinforcing in nature. So thank you once again, Mr. Unhale. So now let me request our speaker today, Professor Véron, to respond to all these queries, observations.
Well, thank you very much for so much food for thought. I'm not sure that I will do justice to your reflections, but I will I will try it, and sometimes also more in the form of new questions. So that has been really stimulating what I hear. First, maybe sort of to Gopa, I think it's for me quite interesting, you know, I mean, because I haven't done any field work recently in West Bengal, and to some extent also because of the COVID situation and making sort of international field work a little bit more difficult. But it's rather disconcerting what I hear from you about the situation in West Bengal. I see that you're no longer with us, but Soumyadip certainly can sort of also reply to this. You know, when we did our research, it was already clear that participation in West Bengal was kind of eroding, but at least for this kind of city development plans, there was at least some sort of a consultation of different interest groups was taking place. The thing of ward committees, and that those were mostly dormant, but there was consultation happening, and the individual municipal councillors, they had quite, they could take some decisions. I mean, there were decisions on very small things, and you can also sort of criticize that. There were sort of decisions that were very often politicized. There was favoritism at work, that's for sure. But nevertheless, that was there. And now it really sort of seems that this is different today. And I would like to hear more about that. What I have found also quite shocking is the data situation, that there's no data collected on various issues. Maybe related to that, I want to refer already to something that Unhale referred to about data that is being produced by municipalities. For us, it was extremely difficult to get to that data, right? It was very difficult. So all the figures, the numbers that you have, that you've seen on the slides, you have to take them with a pinch or with 2 pinches of salt. However, it was possible to extract that data. And I found the comment very funny that 1% of what's being done at the municipality or at the government level is basically published as data. We are very much aware of that. So when we do research, social researchers, looking at the official data is just one thing. So we hang out a lot in government offices and get to know quite a bit through more informal ways. So just as a side remark. Well, still maybe sort of a question then to that type is Soumyadip perhaps is, you know, if there is, let's say, a weakened role of the municipalities and municipal agency in the case of West Bengal, where it's also more, let's say, mission-driven approach, at least is that mission-driven approach then efficient in terms of service delivery, in terms of creating infrastructure? Is that efficient or not, right? To Sally's, that was really great to hear also from Bangladesh and from other parts of the subcontinent. And I appreciated particularly also to bring up the issues of gender that I have not really highlighted in my talk, and this is extremely important. I mean, the talk was really more sort of at the macro meso level, and you brought it further down, and we have done much research at the micro level, but this is, I think, the only paper where we didn't do that. So, but I think it's very important to bring that in. And I'm particularly sensitive about issues of waste workers, a sector that I know a little bit, and the particular women giving unpaid labor for collecting water, for managing waste, where municipal services are failing, is very important. And I think also the concept of people as infrastructure, and particularly women as infrastructure, is quite important in that case. I was sort of just one thing I was sort of kind of thinking I have to also sort of the displacement of labor through smart initiatives and so on and so forth was also quite important to me. I wanted to ask maybe, or to bring it back to the question about capacity building. Do you see these kind of displacements as just a process because it's an insensitive process that's going on, or is it something that that people or governments, let's say in Bangladesh, try to do a quick fix? Yeah, to think that, you know, if we have a mechanized collection system, if we put up incinerators, the whole thing will be more efficient than with an army of waste workers. So that's my question. I mean, it's a very similar question as I had before for Gopa. I mean, at least when you dislocate the workers, is the system in the end more efficient or not at all? The thing about to Mr. Unhale's comments, thank you very much. This is really great also to hear from a civil servant to reflect on these issues. I think that's always quite fascinating. I fully agree that this is not a zero-sum game. There's something for cooperative federalism. From what we could see, however, is that, and I think that, let's say, a central sponsored scheme could theoretically very well work together with a highly decentralized and participatory governance style. However, I don't quite see the instruments that have been put in place that these two could work together and actually reinforce each other. I cannot see that because, I mean, you mention participation under some missions, and I have a very limited view. But just in terms of the smart city mission, for example, what I see there is the citizens, and you use the word citizens, that participated there, the smart citizens, that mean very often people that are very connected, people who have time, often retired professionals who have time, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, it's perhaps a little bit too narrow. And a few years or many years back now, a Indian researcher that I admire quite a bit, Prof Chattopadhyay, has made a distinction between citizens or civil society on the one hand and political society. And his argument was that for particular poorer residents in India, it's very difficult to participate in government and make their claims on their rights, basically, but they have to go through political society. And I think the municipalities in their democratic structure, they have the potential to create a political society in a relatively transparent way. So I think without strengthening the kind of democratic aspects of municipalities, I see it's, I have a little bit difficulties to see how missions can really increase and lead to participation of particularly the poorer sections of society that Sally talked about. Just about one thing about environmental governance, I did actually not talk that much on these issues that you talked quite rightly. You talked about biodiversity, you talked about pollution and so on and so forth. I just did not talk much about that because we have seen very little. I know it is a function or responsibility of municipalities to protect the environment. Where we did our study, we did not see much action in that area. that was really left to particularly the state pollution control boards and their divisional and local offices, so that kind of function. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I at least responded in part to your comments, and I hope that I triggered off some other responses from you through my questions.
No, absolutely. You were spot on, like in responding to almost all the queries that have been raised in this discussion. And just to add to your distinction between political society and civil society, so let me just mention that in the context of West Bengal, what we are seeing is another new concept. That's the concept of party society. That means if you consider this ward committee, because I have the experience of doing this field survey of these ward committees in 2006-07 and also during 2017-18. But well, as Professor Samanta was mentioning, like this nowadays, there are no such ward committees, functional ward committees. You will not see any ward committees are functioning or something like this, because nowadays there is a greater and greater tendency towards decentralization. Because if you now see the government of West Bengal's different welfare program, the welfare schemes, they are mostly delivered through the state machineries. So there are certain other problems, like there are certain political aspects, which again, Professor Samanta was mentioning. But even at the time of, during 2006-07, when there was a kind of functional ward committees were there, but at that time also, what we witnessed is a complete politicization of the ward committee, because be it who will be the member of that ward committee and who are participating in that ward committee, what kind of discussions were taking place in that ward committee, all those are heavily politicized, which actually reduces the very idea of this participatory governance. It was a kind of farce. So that was a kind of party society, was a concept which was introduced, I think, by Visva-Bharati. Yeah, so he introduced this particular concept. So anyway, so let me now, I am still seeing Professor Samanta is still here. So if you please just very briefly.
Yeah, just one thing to add that you rightly pointed out, and Visva-Bharati has expanded the concept in a very big way, like party society. Yes, I when I was mentioning that even ward committee, and I'm sure that Soumyadip also has noticed during his field work that if you are in a ward committee, you will see who are participating. It is only the poor people who were told that you have to come today. There is a meeting and you have to come here. So that's why they only would come and join. But I was thinking that at least there was some machineries where at least you can walk into, you can talk to, you can raise a question. And the middle class was not participating, but there was an avenue that if they want, they could intervene. So that platform, it doesn't exist anymore. And one thing to add to René, environmental governance has taken a completely new dimension in West Bengal, because when Natasha was working on pondscape, Natasha would be very happy to see that some of the ponds are barricaded and they are developed for beautification project, and to compensate, many ponds have been filled up to give to the real estate agents. So that's kind of environmental governance is in practice these days. Thank you. No, I think
so that's what we call the transfer of development rights. This is the new term. Yes, transfer of development rights, because these are generally used in Indian cities to attract more and more private investors so that they can come and invest in the cities for beautification and all these things. So anyway, so thank you, Gopa. Just in spite of your,
you not want to come back to West Bengal with your comments.
Yes, that's why I'm provoking you to come back. Yeah. Okay.
Now, all these aspects just complicating your entire this entire framework of these municipal agencies. So it's just adding some more layers of complexities. So, well, thank you, Professor Samanta. And now let me request Dr. Sally, if you please come in and share your comments. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your great comments. And just a very brief reflection. The role of technology and mechanization is a very interesting area indeed when it comes to waste work. And what I've been looking at in the last couple of years is really human waste specifically. So not so much those involved in the solid waste management, but more the human waste. And actually, again, in both contexts where I've been working, the introduction of trucks, for example, such as vacuum tag trucks to empty human waste from septic tanks and then dump that. But what has been found is that, yes, that can improve safety. Yes, that can improve efficiency. But in terms of cost, there's still a big bottleneck in terms of making it kind of making any cost recovery. There's a lot of challenges in the business model of that. But what I'm really interested in is the displacement of labour, as you mentioned. And with that, what we've been finding is that the key questions are really around who still works doing the manual work, who actually then runs the truck or drives the truck, and who still does the manual emptying in the pits. So there's social demarcations according to who does that. And what we found is that people are worried with the introduction of trucks that they are, they're going to lose their job opportunities, but also then they find that they still might be outsourced the work informally, or the dirtiest work, if you like, informally through very precarious arrangements. So I think there's the key question around, we need to upskill people and we need to provide safety, but we need to also look at those who maybe can't access the skill development or the alternative livelihoods. What happens to those groups? And that's always a really important question when we talk of mechanization or improvement, because you might well improve it for some people, but you might find that it's still informally subcontracted out to particular groups who do not capture the gains, if you like. So I think that's something I'm particularly interested to look into in the future. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks you, Dr. Sally. Yeah. So, and yes, Mr. Unhale. Yes.
Well, I think most of the issues were discussed. So only what really comes to my mind is a question rather than an answer as to know what should be the way forward for the next 20 years for the smaller towns and cities of India or even world for that matter to really work for what we call as climate wise citizen towns, or something which will make a life which is bearable and inclusive for the participants all over the world. I'm just not talking of Maharashtra or India, but as I always say that I find a lot of similarities between the challenges that the cities face. They may be in any part of the world, maybe there will be some changes of finance and technology, but by and large the challenges will be very similar, and something for some greater and closer academic and government collaboration probably is needed, to have this continuous exchange of data, and which probably gets formulated into some frameworks and the exchange of ideas happening, not at any, maybe at international level. We have a lot to learn from each other, and probably we should work out some, some way forward for that. So that's it, Soumyadip sir. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Unhale. So it's straight. I'm requesting Professor Véron, yes, to reflect on this way forward, because that's the best way to sum up this entire discussion.
Yeah, of course, I will not be able to give any answers, and I don't want to, and I'm not able, and I don't want to say what the way forward is for India, right? I don't have any right to do that. However, what the way forward about international collaboration, I think that's a very important point. And I think we also have moved in research quite far, and also in development practice, from thinking that technologies or systems that have been developed and work more or less okay in the north work also in the global south. So I think that kind of idea of transfer of knowledge and technologies and institutions is no longer interesting. And to this, I have currently a project, and it's a wild comparison between solid waste management, mostly organic wastes in Switzerland and in Cameroon. And you would think there's nothing to be compared there, right? The contexts are very, very different. But it's actually quite interesting in how small cities and larger cities in Switzerland can learn from Cameroonian experiences, particularly to close the food waste farming cycle. I mean, in Switzerland you have some systems that are very standardized. You know, you throw all kind of organic wastes together. You have biomechanization, and the output is a little bit of energy. And they say it's fertilizers, but it's not really a very valuable fertilizer for agriculture. So in Cameroon, they have much closer cycles. I mean, people have their home gardens. There's much more urban agriculture and so on and so forth. And they use actually simpler technology, just composting. However, that compost then enriches the soils, not in terms just of its chemical properties, but also structural and the organic, the humus matter. So that is just one small example that we can actually learn from each other through smaller and through bigger initiatives.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Véron. Like, so it's indeed a great engaging session. So we want to continue with this kind of conversation, and one good indication of this fruitfulness of this entire discussion is that still some questions are there which remain unanswered. So we can always look forward and engage in more such kind of discussion, more research to find some answers to these questions. And especially it is very much important to unravel the black box of municipal governance in the Indian cities. So we hope to continue with our discussion in our future city conversation series as well. So on behalf of Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, I want to thank all the participants, our speaker today, Professor René Véron, our discussions, Professor Gopa Samanta, Dr. Sally Cawood, Mr. Samir Unhale, and all the participants who are with us, and also those who are watching these on live on Facebook and other social media. And we hope to have your presence in our future city conversation series as well. So that's all from our side. So it's good night. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.